Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. It's Tuesday. I don't know. I don't think there are any primaries today. I don't know. I forget. And it doesn't matter because it's not Wednesday, and therefore we can't talk about them yet. And when we do, well, we'll have Greg in to inform us of what happened. And, also, does anybody care, given that we know what the outcomes of these things are going to be? I mean, it's not actually, it's an interesting situation that we're in here because we have the two quasi-incumbents anyway. Well, one actual incumbent and one quasi-incumbent who may or may not have been president the first time running for re-election. And, the primaries don't, I guess, sink into ordinary normie American heads anyway, I guess. And people just sort of wait for the general election to roll around and say, okay, well, here are the choices I'm being given. So I don't know. I'm not certain what the impact long term is of something like this, except that it, of course, comes at a terrible time. I mean, there wasn't too much you could do about it, given that Trump is a known quantity. There were going to be people ignoring the primaries anyway. But okay, well, here we are, and I guess we should just jump off of that topic because seeing as how there aren't any primaries today, that's definitely not news, and we can move on from it because it's not news. Although, I don't know, non-news seems to be garnering some attention today. I happened to see, just before coming on the air, Michelangelo, does he say Michelangelo or does he say Michelangelo? I don't know. I can't remember. We, of course, we met at some point, Michelangelo Signorelli, who is he still on Sirius XM? Yes, okay. Still working there. I mean, I think that's a pretty stable platform at this point. It's been around for quite a while. Looks like they're going to keep airing the show and paying them to do so, and that's fantastic. And he was pointing out anyway this morning another, as he says, how did he term it? Another New York Times headline riddle. I guess I'll bookmark this so I can share it with you later. But in case you're on Blue Sky this morning, you may have seen him say this. Another New York Times headline riddle. Maybe he also said it on Twitter. I don't know. It should be, here's what we've got. He's got a screen grab of a Times piece on Navalny. Well, rather that it says in the headline, Trump breaks silence on Navalny death, but doesn't condemn Putin. And there's a subheader to it that is also in the screenshot here. His winding social media post on Monday contained no reference to Vladimir V. Putin, in case you thought it was Vladimir K. Putin or some different Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, they helpfully add at the end of this, who has been widely condemned after the death of one of his most vocal critics, Aleksei Navalny. Now, I guess that's really Russian protocol, perhaps, as much as anything else, to include those middle initials. But we do it here all the time. New York Times will tell you it's Joseph R. Biden is the name of the president. And if they're really feeling formal that morning, Joseph R. Biden Jr., I guess. But anyway, Michelangelo here pointing out this is a bit of a riddle. It should just be Trump brazenly compares himself to Navalny, which is what he actually did and might be the more newsworthy of the events that you could portray in the headline. As he points out, the top news isn't breaks silence. And by the way, winding social media post just adds obscurity rather than stating the news, which is that he's a raving lunatic and has his own social media platform where he just screams obscenities, essentially unfiltered, into the pages of places like the New York Times. Although here they have filtered him a bit. I don't know. I should take a look and see whether they just reprint his statement in the New York Times coverage, but it's not linked here because he's doing this quite deliberately, so that he doesn't drive their feed, and I admire that, but I might go around it. But I did like that. It was kind of interesting. Yeah, the news wasn't that Trump broke his silence, but rather that and it's an interesting thing to do, to compare yourself to Navalny, because I'm freedom fighter, yada, yada, yada. well, if you compare yourself to Navalny and then Navalny is murdered, why do you have nothing to say about the guy who murdered him? Then it's not a very good comparison. But I don't know. Not certain what's driving that guy. Doesn't really matter that much. The more important point, I think, is he points out Trump breaks silence. Not the news here. Although if Trump were really breaking a silence, that might be news, because when was the last Trump silence that you knew about that could be broken? That's a ridiculous thing to say. Trump breaks silence. When? Are we talking about 4 or 5 minute silences that count now as breaking news? I thought that was rather interesting. Other Navalny news this morning, and I'm not certain of the status of this currently, but it was reported this morning that Twitter had suspended the account of Aleksei Navalny's widow about a day after she vowed to carry on his work. I think everybody expected that she would vow to carry on his work. I don't know that anybody expected Twitter to then ban her and prevent her from doing so, at least on that platform. And I imagine that must have come under some pressure from the Putin government. We're going to restrict access to Twitter inside Russia and thereby cut into your advertising revenues unless you do this. Now, I also happen to have seen that Phil Lewis, also becoming already really an ubiquitous presence on Blue Sky, editor at Huffington Post, or HuffPost for one thing. And by the way, senior editor, excuse me. Well, when you're a senior, you're senior. And doing a great job covering the news and, like I say, well, doing a great job being ubiquitous anyway. And that's the same thing, in my view, in terms of, giving me the morning news via social media. And pointing out that the account has now been unsuspended, he says, as of about 27 minutes ago. Let's call that a half an hour. I haven't checked. I'm not likely to check, but, there you are. Banned and unbanned, and I don't know whether somebody thought that was a bad look, or whether that's Elon Musk pushing back to establish his independence, or who knows what. But follow that. Sometimes that's, I don't know. I mean, that's the sort of, I guess a short ban that could always be blamed on an overeager staffer who might then fall out of a window at some point. So anyway, that's the status of that one. And that was something that Justice was mentioning as we were kicking off the show this morning. Also, by the way, let's see, a second, offhand reference here, I guess, to Trump's wackadoodle gold spray painted sneakers that he was selling the other day. Let's see, the shoe has not been manufactured to scale in China yet, and ripped off the design copyright of the top line of the women's shoe designer. Is that really true? And what is this? A sort of French looking name, Louboutin? I have no idea. You're not gonna get me familiar all that quickly with top of the line women's shoe designer names, but it can happen if it worms its way into popular culture, I suppose. And that may or may not be, of course, that may or may not be true. I don't know. That could be happening right now as we speak, because it is foolish and ridiculous enough to be new again. But then, of course, there was the old story of what's her name? Ivanka's shoe line that she just ripped off entirely from somebody. Maybe that's who it was. I don't know. That name doesn't ring a bell, but the subject of ripping off shoe designs certainly does. That seems to run in the family. Yeah, ripping off everything really runs in the family. All right, let's see. Other things to cover today, stationed here in pocket, many things that you might find interesting. And then, of course, the reminder that we are 20 full days into February. Did I tell you what the day's date was? Tuesday, February 20th. I feel like I missed out on, I jumped directly to something else instead, and I didn't give you the date, as though that were important. But anyway, 20 days into a 29-day February this time around. And, of course, a reminder, because it's Tuesday, because we'll be talking to Joan McCarter, you might as well get an update. We're like 10 days away, I guess, from the next government shutdown. And, of course, they're not in town to actually work on anything. I think they are actually planning the House plans to return something like on the 28th of February, which ordinarily would be the last day, but this year we have an extra day. So they figured they'd wait until the last minute. And if they came back on February 28th, they could always point to leap year and say, aha, see, we have an extra 24 hours to work with here. Everything's going to be all right. And it may be because they could always just kick out another CR and say, we'll continue things. But as you know, there's growing frustration among Republican ranks with continuing to do that, and the new controversies surrounding the ability to vacate the chair. So we'll see how they handle it. But in all likelihood, I mean, I guess underlying all this is the people in charge of running the House don't particularly want the government to function. You know that. And so that's going to make keeping the government running something of a challenge, let's say. As a matter of fact, just while we're on that topic, I happened to grab local Washington, D.C. news radio channel, WTOP's report about that from their online website, WTOP.com. It feels funny almost to call it the local news radio station. That is, of course, what it is. If you need the traffic and weather in the Washington, D.C. area, you can get that. You will know which side streets are backed up. It's very local in its focus. But because it is Washington, D.C., of course, national news and federal government news is fairly prominently featured. There are so many federal workers around here that it actually makes sense to tell people the local news, the nitty-gritty about the details of how the appropriations bill is working out and who's working on it and who isn't and what they're planning to do in a way that you might not necessarily find local interest in elsewhere in the country. But then again, remember, WTOP News is also a place where you can do targeted advertising during the news broadcast in the morning in such a way that you can advertise to and probably reach directly in their car while they're commuting the half dozen federal employees who influence something like the purchasing decision on a defense contract of some sort. The advertising mix on WTOP is astounding. So not only your basic, regular, normal national commercials, plus your local commercials, car dealerships, etc., all of that stuff, but you could be driving to work and you'll be hearing advertisements from defense contractors about really super specific projects, or lots of advertising to federal procurement officers, and spending a significant portion of the time allotted to you in your ad by talking about very specific coding protocols so that you can, order your supplies for your federal agency from a certain supplier. It's really something. I don't know how many of you have any memories of commuting to work years and years ago. Since it's a long time since I had to drive anywhere for work and listen to WTOP on the radio on the way in. But if you ever during your commute heard commercials promoting the Navy's purchase of littoral combat ships on your way to work, then you're a WTOP listener. You are in the Washington, D.C. area, and you've been targeted. Seriously, that's not morning drive time advertising ordinarily. Ordinarily you're hearing about the virtues of the new, sausage McMuffin or something like that on your way into work. Something appropriate to the drive time. But littoral combat ships are appropriate at any time, I guess. Anyway, so WTOP is covering the shutdown, which, of course, remember, also means that when there's a government shutdown, vast swaths of the Washington, D.C. area are not able to report to work and, of course, are also not drawing salaries. And it's a very serious situation. That is a kitchen table situation for people in this area. And so under the headline of worries grow about, quote, reckless government shutdown amid House GOP dysfunction. That's quite a headline, and it lays the blame where it belongs. House GOP dysfunction. The next deadline for a government shutdown is less than 2 weeks away. This they wrote back on February 17th, 3 days ago. It is less than 2 weeks away. It's now about 10 days. But Congress will be gone until nearly the end of the month, causing some lawmakers to send warning flares about another pending spending crisis. I like the rhyme. The U.S. House has ended its session on Thursday last week, a day early, after Republicans were unable to secure votes within their own party to address issues including government surveillance and tax cuts. How is it that the Republicans are unable to secure party line votes on tax cuts? Well, just give them a chance. House members don't return until February 28th, just 3 days before the next partial government shutdown deadline on March 1st. Given how long it has taken to reach spending agreements over the past several months, there is concern that 72 hours won't provide enough time to agree on long-term spending agreements. It is vitally important that the Speaker bring forth bipartisan bills that can pass the House, pass the Senate, and do so in time to avoid a reckless government shutdown, said Representative Abigail Spanberger, as she was standing in the middle of the road, not toward one side or the other, just getting ready to run for governor of Virginia. For too many months, we have been coming right up to the precipice of disaster and avoiding it with a continuing resolution. It needs to stop. Even Democrats annoyed by this, I guess. Spanberger said it's vital to avoid a shutdown given what's at stake for federal workers, military service members, and various communities across the country, out there as well. Out there. There are federal workers all over the place. That's how the federal government maintains support for itself. Many lawmakers oppose taking up yet another short-term spending bill that doesn't take care of the federal budget. The budget was technically supposed to be approved by the start of the new fiscal year, last October 1st, but Congress has blown through that deadline for decades. Still, even with the low bar set by congressional standards, this budget is extremely late in getting approved. A second shutdown deadline is March 8th, which is a day after President Joe Biden is set to give his State of the Union address. Something else to keep in mind there. House Republicans have repeatedly discussed the need to return to regular order. They always love to say that, but they never love to do it. And approve all 12 appropriations bills. However, an inability to agree on spending. That's going to get in the way of a spending bill. Inability to agree on spending within the GOP conference has stalled several major pieces of legislation, like all of them, and the entirety of the budget. Small things like that. Anyway, let's see. We'll continue on here, because why not? WTOP has a handle on it. Next section here of frustration builds with the new House Speaker. Can't believe it. Lawmakers with both parties are frustrated as the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, tries to find his way forward, only about 6 months late here, dealing with an unwieldy GOP conference that often torpedoes its own political priorities. Whoops. Johnson, along with former President Donald Trump, helped to kill a bipartisan border deal negotiated by the Senate, after the Senate followed up this week by approving a $95 billion foreign aid package that included assistance for Ukraine, Israel, and, everyone knows it, Taiwan. He said the House wouldn't vote on it. The reason? It didn't address the border, which is the last thing they had killed. So, oh well, womp womp. Not every bill is going to address the border, You know what did address the border? The border bill. But you didn't vote on that either. Democrats are now seeking to flip the script on the border and immigration, charging that Republicans only want to talk about it and not get anything done. House Republicans did impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. I mean, is that good? Should you count that as an accomplishment? They did it, of course, on their second attempt after failing to do so the week before, but that won't go anywhere in the Senate, and Mayorkas will keep his job. The chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Representative Mark Green, Republican of Tennessee, announced the day after the vote that he's going to leave Congress because he hates being in charge of a committee. It sucks so bad. He's one of several Republican committee chairs to head to the exits, something that used to be relatively rare, given the effort it takes to rise to a chairmanship. Some Republicans have made it clear that they believe it was a mistake for the GOP to oust former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who has now also left Congress. There was no sense in removing McCarthy at all, said Representative Carlos, does he say Jimenez? It's a G rather than a J, but I imagine it's still pronounced Jimenez. He, a Republican of Florida, in case you've never heard of him, as I had not. This, he said, as he left the Capitol on Thursday, because whatever the cards were for McCarthy are the same cards that are going to be dealt to Speaker Johnson. That is true. The cards, of course, include the Conservative House Freedom Caucus, which has helped to prevent numerous GOP bills from getting to floor votes. Those bills include a FISA renewal measure that deals with a range of surveillance issues to fight terrorism and lately has been ensnaring Republicans and Republican allies as foreign agents, but gee whiz, no wonder they don't want that one reauthorized. A vote on Thursday on FISA was scrapped by Johnson for a second time due to Republican division. You might even say disarray. Jimenez said the House Republicans had small divisions under McCarthy, but as for his removal, all it did was take a crowbar to it and make it worse. So a little mix of all the problems that Republicans are having in the TOP coverage, and good. That's the way it ought to be, although it's rarely a mystery to the federal workers exactly who is messing with the budget that keeps them open and working and paid. So anyway, just thought I would summarize the situation that way before we turn to Joan McCarter later on for some nitty-gritty detail. Let's see, other things that you might be interested in. I was interested in this. This seemed like an interesting idea and a fun one. The Guardian reports on this one, though he has a television show. The subject of this article has a television show that I have watched and enjoyed and should have watched and enjoyed and be able to report on this to you firsthand. But I don't know. Something got in the way. I was busy watching something else, reading War and Peace, as I've mentioned. But just thought this should be on the radar because it is quite a boss move, as the kids might say. The youngsters, the whippersnappers, as it were. John Oliver, formerly, years ago of The Daily Show, and now with his own fantastic television show on, I don't know, HBO? Yes, that's right. And everyone loves the title. Last Week Tonight. Brilliant. Well, here's the brilliant move. John Oliver offers to pay Clarence Thomas $1 million a year if he resigns from the Supreme Court. He basically just says, whatever they're paying you, I'll double it. You just resign instead of staying on the court. But, there's the unstated value of the prestige of being able to hang around and be a member of the Supreme Court. So we're not compensating him adequately for that, I guess. But otherwise, a good move. Late night host gives the justice under fire over undisclosed donations 30 days to accept the offer, which includes a tour bus. Threw that one in there as well. Late night talk show host John Oliver has offered to pay Clarence Thomas $1 million annually, as well as give him a $2 million tour bus for his camping out in Walmart parking lots, as you know, which he loves very much, if the Republican judge resigns from the U.S. Supreme Court. Oliver made the proposal on Sunday's episode of his HBO show Last Week Tonight, saying the Supreme Court justice had 30 days to accept or it would expire. The British-born progressive comedian's offer came after a steady drumbeat of media investigations in the previous months established that Thomas failed to disclose that political benefactors bought him lavish vacation travel and real estate for his mother. Thomas also failed to disclose, as required, that he allowed school fees for a family member to be paid off and had been provided a loan to buy a luxury motor coach, all after openly complaining about the need to raise Supreme Court justices' salaries. Now, that's a good summation of the situation. I'm just sort of interested to see what else they throw in there, because it's always good to remind everybody just how bad Clarence Thomas is, even though you already know. As a result, Thomas's impartiality came into question after he sided with the contentious ruling that eliminated the federal abortion rights that once were provided by the Roe v. Wade case. Remember, we're hearing from The Guardian here. If you're wondering about the weird approach, sort of, oblique approaches to this reporting. He also recently listened to arguments over whether Donald Trump can be removed from states' ballots in the presidential election after the former president's supporters, whom he told to fight like hell, staged the January 6th attack at the U.S. Capitol. It's in Washington, D.C., they helpfully point out. Thomas resisted pressure to recuse himself from matters pertaining to the Capitol attack, even though his wife, Ginny Thomas, is a conservative political activist who has endorsed fake claims from Trump and his supporters that the 2020 election he lost to Joe Biden was stolen from him, which in turn fueled January 6th. Oliver alluded to all those circumstances as he extended his lucrative offer to Thomas, saying, "A lot on your plate right now, from stripping away women's rights to hearing January 6th cases, and you deserve a break, away from the meanness of Washington, so you can be surrounded by the regular folks whose lives you made demonstrably worse for decades." The host suggested that Thomas could upgrade his favorite mode of travel by signing a contract requiring him to step down from the Supreme Court in exchange for $1 million annually from Oliver, along with the tour bus, which is outfitted with a king-size bed, a fireplace, and 4 televisions. That's pretty good number of televisions for your bus. Oliver joked that Thomas possibly feared that making such a trade might attract negative judgment from one of his top benefactors. I guess that's a possibility. That being the Republican mega donor Harlan Crow, who was reported to have maintained a private collection of Nazi memorabilia that included a pair of paintings by Adolf Hitler. Everyone loves his paint by numbers. But Oliver said, "That's the beauty of friendship, Clarence. If they're real friends, they'll love you no matter what your job is, so I guess this might be the perfect way to find out who your real friends actually are." So that's the offer. $1 million a year, Clarence, and a brand new condo on wheels, and all you have to do is sign the contract and get the F off the Supreme Court, Oliver remarked. "Clock starts now, 30 days. Let's do this." Not bad.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm able to report during the break, I took a look at the New York Times article that we were mentioning at the top of the show about Trump breaking silence on Navalny's death. I was just curious whether the New York Times is one of the papers that goes ahead and just reprints or embeds his Truth Social messages in their online version. They have not done that. And I'm not certain. I'm thinking the way the New York Times tends to operate, they probably don't do that frequently, although I do see that in a lot of newspapers, and I was talking about the weirdness of that the other day. But, they take quite enough. I don't know. I guess if I really wanted to do the research, I would go and take a look at the Truth Social message. But the thing that they describe as the winding social media post contained no reference to Mr. Putin, etc., blah, blah, blah. But he basically, they did quote him, to some extent. I don't know how much of this was left out. There might be other worse things in the Truth Social posting that didn't make it, but he basically, well, there's certainly plenty of the Trump flavor in here. The sudden death of Aleksei Navalny has made me more and more aware of what is happening in our country. Yeah, he goes and compares himself, right? More and more aware. He's becoming more and more famous, like Frederick Douglass, I guess. So apparently he also used a alternative spelling of Mr. Navalny's given name in spelling it this way. I don't know what the difference is between the two by sight, but it was interesting. Good of them to point that out. But then, of course, the quote goes on to say he pointed, that is Trump, to what he called, quote, and then all caps. They do reproduce the all caps here. Crooked, radical left politicians, prosecutors, and judges leading us down a path to destruction. And that they describe as the winding social media post containing no reference to Putin, et cetera, et cetera. And then instead, Mr. Trump cited, quote, open borders, rigged elections, and grossly unfair courtroom decisions, wink, wink, in casting the U.S. in all capital letters as a nation in decline, a failing nation, a different stupid comment about the United States. And then, of course, they point out, well, that's because he has been indicted in 4 criminal cases and is facing 91 felony counts and was ordered on Friday to pay about $450 million in his civil fraud case, not to mention what's going on in the Jean Carroll case, etc., etc. So, anyway, I was just checking in on it to find out whether or not the graphic version of not that he was cursing graphically, although that may have happened too, but did they just embed his Truth Social message right in the piece? And they did the next best thing, just quoting from it extensively, which really they just ought not to be doing in general, but whatever. We've been over that ground before. All right. So we got almost to the end of the story of John Oliver offering Clarence Thomas $1 million a year to leave. The only things I would add, I guess, that we didn't get to is that the yearly salary for Supreme Court justices right now, stands at $298,500 annually. So he's getting just shy of $300,000. Of course, he was complaining that wasn't enough. Boo-hoo for him, et cetera, et cetera. I guess we're talking about John Oliver more than tripling his salary income, plus, of course, substantially upgrading his palace on wheels, which I don't know how often Thomas is using anymore. It used to be his favorite mode of vacation, but then when he got upgraded to worldwide private jet travel, super yacht vacations, etc., I don't know how often he's been going back to the motorhome. But I guess we could find out at some point. But he probably won't be taking up the offer. And by the way, John Oliver saying, he admits he'll be probably doing stand-up comedy dates for the rest of his life to pay that off, but I think it would be well worth it. And I think we could raise that money for him on GoFundMe at this point, because why not? That reminds me that, I did notice over the weekend that people were using GoFundMe, or maybe some of the other Republican alternatives for GoFundMe. I can't recall, but I think it might have actually been on GoFundMe. People were actually, not actually. They were said they were attempting to raise money to help Trump pay off his enormous fines because, of course, they sided with him in thinking that they were enormously unfair. By the way, Jonathan Turley, apparently, also out on that front, saying, along with the people at, Reason Magazine and the Federalist, saying it was all extraordinarily unconstitutional to fine him for all these things. Why, it was a denial of his due process rights, minus, of course, the fact that he just went through that process that he was due and lost. But, other than that, it was total denial of due process. And something else. Basically, they ran through a list of things that are in the Constitution that they feel were, because they're there, and yet these things happened to Donald Trump, they must be violations of those things, and so therefore it all should be reversed. But Turley saying that on appeal, the award should be severely limited. The issue, of course, with getting to the appeal stage is that you got to put up the bond plus interest on the appeal before you're even entitled to get it, which, of course, is a denial of due process, in a manner of speaking. But anyway, there you have it. And, so they're complaining about that. And and I don't know. I forget how we even got to this. But at any rate, they were GoFundMe-ing this. Some grifters essentially saying, if you send me the money, I'll totally forward it to Donald Trump. I won't keep it myself. Wink, wink. And at least one such grifter had succeeded, I think, over the weekend in getting, I don't know, I stopped looking when he had like 1,500 people. She, I believe, had 1,500 people donating to this cause, whether or not she was actually going to hand that money over, or whether or not all those people were ever going to send their money. I don't know. But I also noticed that there was very specific language being used in setting up the GoFundMe page that was duplicated, mirrored word for word by some 15 to 20 other grifters claiming to be doing exactly the same thing, though they all at that point had 0 donors. I wonder whether that has changed over the weekend. And I guess you could probably go over to GoFundMe. GoFundMe.com. And I guess you could search around. Where's the search function here? There we go. Right there on the front page was one of them. Oh, and I forgot that the one person who actually we were focusing on is an interesting personage all by herself. This is Elena Cardone is the name of the person sponsoring this drive. Now remember, the goal is to raise $355 million. Which I guess GoFundMe hasn't canceled up front because they figure, well, I mean, what if they raise $355 million? We get a take of that. What do they take, 10% or something? So $35.5 million in fees. I guess if you want to try to raise that money, what if they succeed? Maybe we should take the 10% on this, as opposed to saying this is unrealistic and stupid and really this is a misuse of our resources. You can't raise money to pay for another idiot's fraud. That seems like fraud. So maybe we shouldn't allow it. But here we are. Anyway, more about the sponsor of this thing in a minute, I guess. But right now, as things stand, 12,400 people have been foolish enough to donate a total of $650,000, allegedly, to this GoFundMe drive. As it says, sharing has raised $49 on average by donation. Here's an anonymous $10,000 donation listed here. And I can't believe, talk about your one-off stuff right now. How you make a $10,000 anonymous donation? Why would anybody donate anonymously to Donald Trump and in that amount? I mean, I guess there's, dark money sort of thing, like doing it anonymously, but then getting word to Trump in, through back channels. If you donate $10 million, you can get word to him. You'll stay anonymous so that you don't get attacked in the press about it, but you'll get word to Donald Trump that you gave that money. I don't know if you can get a moment of his time for $10,000, but maybe. Anyway, this was an interesting effort, both because Elena Cardone is a cuckoo in her own right, but also because of the wording of her GoFundMe campaign here. Stand with Trump, fund the $355 million unjust judgment. Now, of course, $355 million, that's a figure that leaves out the 9% interest, so there's a good $100 million additionally that they're missing in all of this, but that's fine. Plus, of course, 10% cut off the top. So they're going to fall several $100 million short, even if they were to raise all the money, which they won't. I mean, I don't know what the all-time record is for raising money on GoFundMe, but it's not $355 million. Anyway, the bigger point was that I guess somebody took the title, Stand with Trump, fund the $355 million unjust judgment, and went back to the GoFundMe search engine and searched that exact phrase and found like 6 more with that same title, plus a few with slightly different titles. But I've just done the same thing here too, and I get 6 results in total, although it looks like this is interesting. Two of them are Elena Cardone, though one is listed as having raised $0 and the other is the $651,755. While we were talking, somebody added $1,000 to the pot. But also one Lorena Baciu, maybe Baciu, who cares, right? But at any rate, also has a Stand with Trump, fund the $355 million unjust judgment, as does Dev Chauhan, same exact headline, different picture, but same exact headline. And then another one from Elena Cardone. I should click through and see whether it just links to the other one or not. And I guess it does. Oh, wait a minute. This is interesting. Hold on a second. I gotta weave my way through all these things. Then there was one from Alan Warren. Again, different picture. Stand with Trump. Fight the unjust judgment. Slightly different headline. And then Brandon Bethel. Stand for Trump. Fund the $355 million unjust judgment. So my guess is that you'd probably find another dozen or so under slightly different headlines, but that's what comes up when you search word for word on the one Cardone was using. Now, we were just on the Cardone page, and the main page, like I said, when we hit it the first time, was $650,012. It's now $650,825. And the thing is, there was this other page here, another Elena Cardone one that shows on the search page as having raised $0, but when you click through it, likewise shows, it doesn't show the amount of money, but it does show the $49 on average thing. And here the text of the original page appears, but also some additional text. Now, the original text says, and it was interesting in its own right, this text: my name is Elena Cardone, and I am a wife of Grant Cardone. And that caught everybody's attention. Not the wife of Grant Cardone. Not that anybody necessarily knows offhand who Grant Cardone is, but you still, in the United States, you can pretty much expect that there's one wife at a time. And that even if you are, Marla Maples is a wife of Donald Trump, and she might describe herself that way, but usually people will say something like, I am the ex-wife. You can't even do that with Donald Trump because there were two ex-wives, but one's dead. So you might be able to get away with just but ordinarily you might say, I am the wife of Grant Cardone. Mother, of course, and an ardent supporter of American values and an advocate for justice. I stand unwaveringly with President Donald Trump in the face of what I see as unprecedented and unfair treatment by certain judicial elements in New York. She goes on to say more dumb things, and others have done great research just looking up who is Elena Cardone, and she's a bit of a wackadoodle all by herself. Somebody who, I don't know whether she had independent success on her own prior to marrying Grant Cardone, but Grant Cardone, I guess, is a real estate multi-millionaire / possible billionaire. I say possible because in one of the bios that Elena circulates, she says at one point that they have a real estate portfolio together worth $1.9 billion, but then they also say, well, that's actually $5.2 billion. So we're not really sure how many billions of dollars of real estate they actually own. And it also could be zero. We don't know. But anyway, now that she is part of this team of billionaire, presumably billionaire slumlords, she's also, just wants you to know, she's like with most billionaires of this ilk, she has constructed a sort of a fake habitat around herself, a bubble in which she's the icon, international icon of success. She's a lifestyle influencer. She's an entrepreneur. She's a businesswoman. She's an executive. She's a this, she's that, and all these things. But, the chief use of her money is making her look like she's in charge of making lots of money. So anyway, just your typical profile for somebody like this. Well worth your time off the air if you felt like it, looking her up. Elena, Elena Cardone, Cardone. She also claims to be an actress and model, that she was a successful actress and model before meeting, and maybe that was how she met Grant Cardone. Although I did look her up. She does have an IMDb profile, but lots of people do. I do, as a matter of fact. I've never done anything for a movie. I think I helped once with somebody else making a movie on their own, and I got into the credits, and so now I have an IMDb profile somehow. But anyway, more to the point, she's got one, and I don't know, does it really count if you have I'm a successful actress? How so? Every single one of like a whopping 4 credits on IMDb is her playing, quote unquote, I guess, playing herself, making appearances on other people's podcasts or in other people's movies or weirdo, self-financed documentaries, and she appears as herself. That's not really being an actor, though, is it, if you're yourself? Anyway, what can I tell you? She's a wackadoodle. But what I thought was interesting was I just checked on the other page that is also credited to her at GoFundMe, and this one begins, warning for fraud, it says, right up at the top. This fundraiser is after GoFundMe took down the previous fundraiser for the globalist elite. My name is Elena Cardone, and I am a wife of Grant Cardone, mother and ardent supporter. So she goes into this. This was created, it says, 2 hours ago, which means, if it's accurate, that the one created 4 days ago that collected $650,825 is gone because of the globalist elite, of course. And she's starting over again. Or it means that some very creative grifter has signed up as perhaps capital E, capital I, ENA Cardone and started her own, his or her own fundraiser pretending to be Elena Cardone and just figuring that they would keep all the money. And it would be that much more delicious if they started this second one by saying, here's a warning, the global elite stole the rest of the money on the other one, so we have to start over here. So all of you who wanted to help Donald Trump and did help him in the other one, help us out again here. Besides, you won't be charged twice because they canceled the other one, so you don't have to worry about being charged for that one. Except wink, wink, maybe you were. I don't know. It's a hell of a world out there. And what can I tell you? You got to beware of grifters grifting off of other grifters. So just be careful out there, everybody. Speaking of all of this, let's throw this piece in here. I thought this might be of some interest to us all. Aaron Rupar, at his site Public Notice, has Liz Dye writing this piece, which I thought was making an important point. We are all victims of Trump's fraud. How so? If you wanted to know, here's a picture of him, by the way, posing at SneakerCon, his latest con, just one of many, and he'll go to anything named con. I can't believe that they actually let him do this. Anyway, with the golden sneakers, this is what's illustrating we are all victims of Trump's fraud. Stealing a little bit from everyone is still stealing. Just a reminder of exactly what's going on here, especially as Trump supporters say, come on, this is unconstitutional. This is the way real estate business is done. It's all about vibes, and the valuation is a variable. Everybody knows that, et cetera, et cetera. Shouldn't he be allowed to do this? Well, here's, I think, a fine point put on it by Liz Dye here. Is lying on your loan application in order to get better terms a victimless offense? Now remember that Donald Trump is claiming that, essentially, that he was lying on his loan applications. He doesn't make the same kind of loan applications you and I make, of course. He just goes in and twists arm, but he has to fill out paperwork saying that there's some value to the assets that he's putting up as collateral, and he just lies about it. So is that a victimless offense? He basically says, what am I doing? So I'm taking someone for a ride. It's a banker. He's stealing money from you people left and right. What's the difference if we steal a little back from him? Well, Donald Trump and his supporters claim it is a victimless offense, but In damning detail, Justice Arthur Engoron sketched out who was wronged in his 92-page verdict. And it turns out it's not just lenders, it's just anonymous bankers, it's all of us. What do you know? On Friday afternoon, Engoron, having found that the former president and his company submitted dozens of false financial reports to lenders and insurers, ordered them to disgorge, Trump's that is, to disgorge $355 million in ill-gotten gains to the state of New York, plus a boatload of prejudgment interest as well. And remember, this is disgorgement, right? These are unfair gains that he made at, as it turns out, everybody's expense. And there's no justification in the world for allowing him to keep it. So it's disgorged, and disgorged to the state, after all. Trump and his sons are, and again, also, I guess it's also worth pointing out, is this a fine for his behavior? No, this is just, you stole this money and we can't allow you to sit with it and enjoy its fruits. It doesn't belong to you. That's what's going on here. It's not so much a fine as it is a declaration that you should never have had this money in the first place. So, Trump and his sons are barred from serving as officers or directors of any New York corporation, including their own, for at least a couple of years. And the Trump Organization will get a full-time babysitter, in case whichever sock puppet the Trump boys stand up and get to stand in for them decides to engage in even more fraud. This doesn't mention Ivanka in any way? Is she not a part of this? My father built the skyline of New York City, and this is the thanks he gets, Eric Trump wailed on Fox News. He didn't, of course, build the skyline of New York City. And even if he had, so what? Eric's dad was angrier and even less coherent, spending much of the weekend calling the judge a communist on Truth Social, in between posts hawking his new Payless Metallics sneaker line. Oh, okay. Payless Shoes was the one putting that one out. That's pretty funny. Payless Shoes, $400. This election interference and tyrannical abuse of power by a crooked judge and crooked attorney general cannot be tolerated, Trump fulminated, and in, true to form, they reproduced the whole thing right out of Truth Social, the thing that we didn't want to see done. There were no victims, and not one person, I guess you'd be using his voice for this, not one person testified there was any fraud, except many people actually did. Trump went on, adding that the actual bankers who were involved in the loan transactions testified I was a highly sought-after whale of a client. That's funny. With one of the strongest personal balance sheets they had ever seen. And I was overqualified for the loans. Those banks earned more than $100 million in profits doing business with me and my companies. Debunking Donald Trump's lies is like trying to catch raindrops with your bare hands, but the most insidious lie here is that there were no victims, a talking point that quickly became canon in right-wing media and among Trump supporters. In fact, as Engoron explained in his verdict, there were two categories of victims: the parties involved in the transactions with him and all the rest of us. First, because why not? The corporate victims. It's easiest to see these guys, I guess. But they love being listed first because they're corporate. The court found that Donald Trump, his sons, and the Trump Organization's top execs conspired to pass off false statements of financial condition, SFCs, to lenders every single year. Most egregiously, they claimed that the Trump's condo in Trump Tower in Manhattan was 30,000 square feet instead of the 10,996 square feet that it actually is. I mean, it's big enough, don't you think? A fudge which increased his reported net worth by some $200 million alone, just by itself. But fraud was a way of life for the Trump family. For instance, Eric Trump testified that he had little understanding of the finances of the business he runs and is more of a construction guy. He also testified that he had no idea until this case came into fruition that the SFCs even existed. In reality, he was responsible for a Trump property known as Seven Springs and repeatedly vouched for the purposes of these SFCs, that it was worth $161 million, despite multiple appraisals valuing it somewhere between $5 million and $21 million. And even as a construction guy, you'll need to know that. In a normal world, we would have to rely on expert testimony to figure out what Trump got for telling so many lies about his net worth. But here, as the state's expert witness, Michelle McCarthy, it's Michael with the different spelling, pointed out, Deutsche Bank ran what was functionally a real-time control group by making loan offers from two separate departments. For years, Trump went in what was essentially the front door, dealing with Deutsche's commercial real estate division, which would finance a loan based on the underlying value of the property itself, more or less. But in 2011, Jared Kushner introduced Trump to his family banker, Rosemary Vrablic, I guess, maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, who worked in Deutsche's private wealth management division. Vrablic was in the business of whales, as Trump put it, and her deals were less about a single asset being used as collateral and more about the individual borrower. Vrablic, maybe it's Vrablic. Okay, Vrablic and her bosses were willing to lend Trump money on extremely favorable terms, but he had to personally guarantee the notes. Now, how Trump's fraudulent business practices finally came back to bite him is the next section here. The commercial division was offering what they call non-recourse loans. That is, loans where the bank could take the mortgaged property in case of default, but not Trump's other assets. I see. Meanwhile, the private wealth division was offering much better rates on full recourse loans where Trump had to personally guarantee that the bank could get paid. How much better? Well, we'll read one bit of Engoron's verdict direct here that they quote, in calculating the interest differentials for the perceived credit risks with and without a personal guarantee on the Doral loan, McCarthy took the competing loan proposal terms that Deutsche Bank's commercial real estate group had offered, which was the LIBOR rate, remember that? 8 plus 8% with a floor of LIBOR plus 2% or 10%, and compared them to the terms extended by Deutsche's private wealth management division, more closer to 1.8 to 4.1. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's go back. We'll double back and get the bottom line of what Judge Engoron was saying as we were reading here. Public notice, the public notice piece by Liz Dye over who are the victims in the Trump fraud case that was just tried before Justice Engoron, who spent considerable time in his ruling pointing out exactly who was taken for a ride, who lost money, who ended up transferring their wealth to Donald Trump's organization to the tune of $355 million that was ordered disgorged from the organization. And he was pointing out that Trump, in dealing with Deutsche Bank, essentially gave Deutsche Bank a chance to run an experiment every time that he came in looking for loans. When he went to the commercial real estate loan division that anybody else in the world would have to go to, it looks like they were getting ready to offer loans at a rate of something in the neighborhood of 8 to 10% interest on the loans that he was asking for. Whereas when he worked with the private wealth management division, he was being offered loans on terms of somewhere between 1.8 and 4.1% interest, depending, as it says here, on whether it was pre or post renovation. So, a little bit of variance here, but somewhere between 2 and 4% interest being charged by the private wealth group versus 8 to 10% interest from the commercial group. Now, again, the commercial group offered non-recourse loans. That is, you could lose whatever you put up for collateral, but they weren't able to go after your other assets if you defaulted. That's part of why the interest rate was 8 to 10%, covering their risk by charging more upfront in interest. But he could also, as in many cases, get these loans at considerably lower rates, 2 to 4%, if he took out a full recourse loan, that is, a personal guarantee that the bank would get paid back. So you can get a lower interest rate up front because the bank knew that they could go after your total assets and get themselves paid back if necessary. So that's important. He had recourse, or rather he had access to these low interest loans that you and I wouldn't have access to. But it depended on one thing, demonstrating to a bank that you had sufficient resources personally across all of your portfolios to back up that loan. And that's where he, would tell them, my condo alone is worth $200 million more than it actually is. And the Seven Springs property worth $160 million, except really not, more like $20 to $40 million. And the benefit of doing that was, of course, it helped induce Deutsche Bank to think that it should be okay to lend to him at a rate of 2 to 4% instead of a rate between 8 and 10%, because he said he had all these assets that would back them up. And as it turns out, he did not. Anyway, all he had to do to get those sweet low rates, Liz continues here, was show that he was rich enough to be worth the risk. And that is where the SFCs come in, because Trump would never have qualified for those preferential rates if he'd been honest about his wealth and the real value of his cash reserves. The Doral note, which I guess he took out to finance the renovation of the Florida Golf Club, was issued in 2011 from the Private Wealth Division, required him to maintain a net worth of $2.5 billion, not including his brand. It also required that he submit annual SFCs attesting that he was still wealthy enough to be worth the risk. An ongoing fraud, as it turns out, that required the Trump Organization to spend an inordinate amount of time massaging the books to keep the bankers happy. Applying McCarthy's calculations, Justice Engoron came up with a savings of $10 million per year on the Doral note alone because Trump had gotten that lower rate. And again, another quote from the decision here. In 2020, the Doral loan was $125 million. Applying a non-recourse rate of 10% results in an interest payment of $12.5 million. Applying the recourse rate of 1.9348% that he had from the Wealth Management Division results in an interest payment of $2,418,500. Subtracting the latter from the former yields a savings of over $10 million. And that's just one loan. Using McCarthy's formulas and circumscribing the time period to comply with the statute of limitations, the court calculated a reasonable approximation of the ill-gotten interest rate savings for 4 loans. In other words, okay, so they just focused on these 4 loans for various reasons, and they only focused on them for certain time periods. That is to say, they ignored all of the ill-gotten gains which were gotten prior to the statute of limitations. You know, if you haven't, I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but it seems to go back to about 2014, 2015. It's about 10 years, I guess. He'd been doing this scam and stealing money this way for decades, but they couldn't reach all of that. So in reality, he's stolen far more than the $355 million that they hit him with in penalties. But they just couldn't reach it because it was time limited. But even so, 4 loans out of dozens, hundreds probably, that he's taken out over the years, and limited to the last 10 years, we have about $72.9 million in fraudulent interest savings on the Doral golf course loan, $53.4 million on the old post office loan. Now, what is that? Just a reminder, the old post office, that's actually the building in which he opened the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. So $72.9 million in savings on the loan from the Doral golf course, $53.4 million in illegitimate savings on the Trump hotel deal, $17.4 million on the Chicago loan, and $24.2 million on the 40 Wall Street loan. So 4 out of dozens of loans, who knows how many he's taken, and each one multiple millions of dollars in ill-gotten gains. And whether Deutsche Bank and the other lenders are complaining about it or not, that is money that Trump got from them by committing fraud. So, if the question is, who was harmed here? The answer is very clearly the lenders who missed out on tens of millions of dollars that they would have collected had Trump paid an interest rate commensurate with the actual level of risk that the banks took when they loaned money to him. More tangibly, if Trump hadn't lied, someone else would have gotten those deals. And that person didn't get the profit that he or she would have reaped if Trump hadn't lied about his financial situation to make himself look more attractive. You understand that? That makes sense to you, right? Somebody else is always out there after money as well. Somebody else wanted that 300 or some part of that $355 million to finance their own business ventures that would have created jobs and generated wealth for, granted for them and maybe some other people as well. And maybe they would have been just as dickish with the money. We don't know. But the point is they didn't get it, or they had to pay more for it from Deutsche Bank or someone else because Trump had gobbled up this capital instead based on a lie. And then, of course, stuffed it in his own pockets, creating zero jobs for anybody, by the way. So, for instance, they point out here, in 2010, Trump won the concession from the New York City Parks Department to run a golf course at Ferry Point, based in part on his claim that his net worth exceeded $3 billion and that he had $200 million in cash reserves. He then submitted fraudulent SFCs annually, along with a letter from his accountant stating that there had been no material adverse change in his financial position. In June of 2023, he sold the concession to Bally's, netting $60 million. So, on the surface, hey, he made an investment. It improved in value. He sold to Bally's. He made $60 million. What can you do? Nothing wrong with that, except he should never have been in a position to pocket that $60 million profit because he really legally wasn't entitled to own this property. He had lied his way into buying it. Next up, Trump trolls the New York court en route to an epic loss. Justice Engoron ordered Trump to disgorge that $60 million. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess that was not a next section. That was the promotion of another piece, a companion piece to this one. All right. Well, at any rate, Justice Engoron ordered Trump to disgorge that $60 million in profit that he got from the sale to Bally's, along with an additional $127 million that he netted from the sale of the old post office hotel in D.C., on the theory that those deals would have gone to someone else if Trump hadn't lied so flagrantly about his wealth. Right? There were competitors for buying or at least leasing the old post office, whether to turn it into a hotel or something else, we don't know. But Trump won it, and he won it on the basis of lying to, in this case, the federal government about being worth the risk of selling it to him at favorable rates or leasing it to him at favorable rates. Same with the golf course in the Parks Department in New York. Someone else could have operated it, and someone else could have made and pocketed that $60 million in profit, selling it later on to Bally's, but Trump got it because he lied about how much he was worth in order to convince the sellers or lessors in these cases to make a deal with him. So, in a very real sense, it says the victims are the second most attractive bidders for those deals, who would have gotten the Ferry Point and old post office contracts if they hadn't gone to Trump. Now another section called We Are All the Victims here. So let's see how we can expand on this. Less tangibly, but no less importantly, is the damage that this persistent fraud does to the marketplace itself. And remember how much they love the marketplace? Yeah. Put simply, lying about your creditworthiness makes it more difficult for lenders to price risk. So they have to charge a higher premium to everybody, right? If you make a deal like this and then it turns out that you've been taken for a ride, that you've lost hundreds of millions of dollars in interest based on a lie that may or may not have come back to bite you in the end. But, the fact that you have hundreds of millions of dollars less in profit always comes back to bite you. But let's say, what if there had been a default in the middle of all of this? And there will be when they ask him to pay this disgorgement. He's not going to be able to come up with this money. He's going to default on the government. So everybody, all the private lenders get protected, certainly. But anyway, along the way here, had there been fraud, there would have been tremendous losses to make up had there been a default. There was fraud. Had there been a default, and there may yet be, the lenders would have been left holding the bag, and they would have made that up by raising rates on everybody else. You thought you had an 8 to 10% loan rate, or were being offered an 8 to 10% loan rate to pull off this same deal that Trump was able to do at 2 to 4%. And as it comes around to signing the papers, time to sign the papers, they say, surprise, if you want to go forward, it's actually 10 to 12%. No fault of your own, but we've been hit by a bunch of major defaults lately by people who are lying about having assets to back up the loans that they took from us. And you're all going to have to make up the difference. So, that's what happens here. Timely and total repayment of loans does not extinguish the harm that false statements inflict on the marketplace, by the way. Indeed, the common excuse is that everybody does it. Well, that's all the more reason to strive for honesty and transparency and to be vigilant in enforcing the rules, the judge wrote. Here, despite the false financial statements, it is undisputed that the defendants have made all the required payments on time. But the next group of lenders who receive bogus statements might not be so lucky. That's what you got to look out for. For years, Trump argued that the state of New York, the financial capital of the country and one of the financial capitals of the world, had no interest in preserving the integrity of the market itself in the absence of a lender complaining of injury. But as Justice Engoron points out, that's simply a defense of the right to steal a little bit from everyone stupid enough to tell the truth on their loan applications. And Trump's refusal to even acknowledge his lies, much less show any remorse, demonstrate exactly why the state needed to step in. Again, from the judge's decision, this court is not constituted to judge morality. It is constituted to find facts and apply the law. In this particular case, in applying the law to the facts, the court intends to protect the integrity of the financial marketplace and thus the public as a whole. Defendants' refusal to admit error, indeed to continue it, according to the Independent Monitor, constrains this court to conclude that they will engage in it going forward unless judicially restrained. Indeed, Donald Trump testified that even today, he does not believe the Trump Organization needed to make any changes based on the facts that came out during this trial. This year, beginning with the $83 million verdict in the E. Jean Carroll defamation trial and followed by the massive civil fraud penalty in New York, may be the first time in his life that Trump actually paid a real price for lying. And it's only February. With 4 criminal trials pending, this might well be the year that Trump finally reaches the find out part. But for now, we get to watch him try to come up with $500 million in cash in the next 30 days. You love to see it, Liz concludes. And that brings us to the end of the piece. But yeah, a good explanation of why it is that this so-called victimless crime really does have victims. And I mean, the cost of the risk is always going to be passed on to you. Yeah, all I did was stick it to some bankers. Everybody wants to stick it to the bankers. Yeah, except the thing is the bankers know that everybody wants to stick it to them, and they price that into your loans. So if you're looking to start a business or buy a home, that will come out of your hide. Because they know Trump took them for a ride, they're going to try and make up the difference from out of your loan because you have no leverage against them. You can't go to the private wealth side and just find yourself a better deal by lying about your assets. But that's what Trump did. And every extra dollar he made, that makes me smart, right? It makes you a thief. He stole it out of the pockets of everybody else who had to take a normal loan. And it's worth keeping in mind. Okay, so it's not directly political and it doesn't have anything to do with procedure, but well worth our time, if you ask me. By the way, let's see, other things that I wanted to share with you, and there are many, and I don't know that I'm going to get through even half of them, but I thought I might share this little piece with you from Raw Story, who has, of course, collected the reporting from several sources and brought it all together uniquely here. I sometimes will go directly back to those sources, but really, they do a great job sometimes weaving together the narrative from the reporting of several sources. And you can't get it all from just reading one. In this case, David Badash, does he say bad like badass? That'd be something like bad, or is it maybe Badash, perhaps? Who writes for Raw Story. The shooting at the parade has, of course, resulted in some dumb stuff being done by Republicans. So I thought I would fill you in on it because it's just so typically Republican. A particular Chiefs fan who was at the parade, at the celebration, has been getting death threats. Why? Because, of course, a Republican congressman has falsely ID'd him as the shooter. Oh, great. That's why wait for facts when you can jump to conclusions and ruin somebody's life? That's the Republican MO. U.S. Representative Tim, is it Burchett or Burchett? I don't know, of Tennessee, who has no business in any of this, of course, is being criticized for wrongly identifying the suspect in last week's Super Bowl parade shooting in Kansas City, Missouri, and also claiming that this particular person he was blaming it on is, of course, and this is why he was blaming it on him, an illegal alien. Well, of course, not only has he misidentified the person and were they not the shooter, but also not an illegal alien or anything of the sort. Actually, just a regular American, but his skin was probably a little too dark for Congressman Burchett to stomach. So why not blame him for the shooting and call him an illegal alien? By the way, the update, you've probably heard by now, but just by way of pointing out how this thing happened, it was just, it wasn't a mad AR-15 shooter from a nearby office tower. It was just, I guess, quote unquote, just a couple of people who had guns because Missouri says everybody should carry guns around with them, who had a misunderstanding of some kind, some sort of fight at the place. And this will happen because people are rowdy and crowded together and sometimes drunk, and they decided that maybe the way they should settle this thing was to pull out guns and start shooting at one another. And I don't think they got each other, but this is one of those things that happens when everybody's armed and you bring a crowd together and somebody has a beef. Well, people in the crowd are going to get shot and killed instead because that's the nature of guns, but something, God-given right, yada, yada. Anyway, on from there, we now have the other unintended/intended consequence of all of this, the ability for Republicans to point fingers and blame and further ruin other lives that weren't already destroyed that day. Congressman Burchett made national headlines last year after the Covenant Elementary School mass shooting, elementary school mass shooting in Nashville, which at least was his state, when he told reporters while standing in front of Congress, quote, "We're not going to fix it." That is to say, we're not going to do anything about guns in this country. No legislation. Criminals are going to be criminals. What can you do? 3 9-year-old students and 3 staff members were killed by a shooter with 2 AR-15 style assault rifles and a handgun. He instead called for a Christian revival. That'll solve things. But on Thursday, Representative Burchett posted to Twitter the photo of a man seated with his arms behind his back and flanked by law enforcement officers. And he tweeted, "One of the Kansas City Chiefs victory parade shooters has been identified as an illegal alien." He falsely claimed in his social media post, there's a screenshot of it below apparently, the post received 1.4 million views. That man is not the shooter, is not a suspect in being the shooter, nor is he an undocumented immigrant, according to reports. On Thursday, CNN reported 3 people, including 2 juveniles, had been taken into custody. The adult was not arrested and was released. 2 juveniles were charged with crimes connected to the mass shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl rally. As the city tries to recover in the aftermath of the violence, the Associated Press later reported a mother and popular disc jockey died in the burst of gunfire Wednesday at the parade and rally as a rally was concluding. The man that Representative Burchett and others falsely claimed on social media was one of the shooters has been identified. I mean, I hesitate to call out the name at this point, except that at least it's in connection with his having been identified as not being one of the shooters or suspects. His name is Denton Loudermill. He's a native of, is it Olathe? I don't know how that is pronounced, but I just thought, well, I'll read it out, but it's in Kansas, not in Missouri. And I don't know how else to say it. He's not only not an illegal alien, he's just a citizen of the United States who happened to be in a picture. And I don't know. It's unclear to me where Burchett comes up with the idea. It might have been just in his own head, but it may also have been a game of telephone via social media. Somebody said somewhere that he was an illegal alien, and it sounded like that was good enough for my narrative, so I'd pick up on it and repeat it as well. So there you go. And then, of course, now people have spent, who knows how much time threatening him, sending notes, I'm sure tracking him down online, basically attempting to destroy the guy's life based on, something that some idiot passed on or made up entirely in his own head because he benefits politically from blaming infamous crimes on illegal aliens, even when they don't exist. Okay. Just thought I would point that out for your edification, just so you knew that it was going on. Another item that I want to get to today, sounds like a developing story here that we might benefit from knowing about. The Daily Beast reporting on one aspect of it, and then I will add something else to the take here. But Jake LaHutte and Reese Gorman reporting for the Daily Beast. Trump's RNC takeover is on the brink of becoming a purge, as they put it. That is to say, the takeover of the Republican National Committee, which he, of course, per usual practice was, quote unquote, entitled to take over when he was president. Now, of course, he's not president, but he's the presumptive nominee, and usually you get to install people of your choosing at the top of the Republican National Committee. The RNC chair is usually somebody you can suggest, if not named directly. And because of an interest in coordinating activities between the national party structure and the you usually get your wish. But of course, changes are being made. And as it turns out, it looks like, in the other article I had put aside, it looks like he will succeed in installing Eric's wife, Lara Trump, as at least co-chair of the Republican National Committee, just so that he can make sure that he can steal all the rest of the money. By the way, I've just noticed that I've got an email here that's actually been in my inbox for some time, that Joan can't make it today. So I was just worrying, am I going to be able to get through this story and share it with you? Not before the next break, and not before I then anticipated hearing from Joan. But as it turns out, she can't make it here today. Sorry for the late notice, she says, but it's not that late. And 9:09 a.m. it came in, so plenty of time to warn you about that for the last segment had I seen it earlier, but I didn't look. But at any rate, at least I got to tell you before the break itself, and now I won't be sitting here wondering. Anyway, well, we'll miss her, and we'll catch up with her next week, just prior to the next government shutdown, I guess. So at least we'll have that going for us. But it does give us a chance to talk about, in the next segment, the purge and the remaking of the Republican National Committee, which normally, you can kind of expect that they will remake the place in the image of their nominee, but this one goes beyond the usual, which should not surprise you, given that that's the general MO for Donald Trump. And, of course, the extent to which he has hollowed out their coffers in his own favor. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And as I mentioned, yes, we're going solo today. Joan can't make it, as it happens, and we understand these things do happen from time to time, and we'll manage. The government isn't shutting down right away. She'll get one last chance at warning everybody exactly when it will shut down. Although, well, let's see, 10 days from now. Yeah, okay, so we still have some time. And I guess we'll have another next crack at it on February 27th, the day before members of Congress are scheduled to return, because, as you know, their week begins on Wednesday and ends on Thursday. And then, of course, we'll see how they do in their terrific struggle to maintain an operating government. But first, back to how Donald Trump plans to steal all the money from the Republican National Committee, which, fantastic. I suppose that's a victimless crime in a way, but no, you can still be prosecuted, presumably for some of this, depending on how it works. But you can do things the legal way by simply insisting that every member of the Republican National Committee, top to bottom, including the executives that you normally can appoint, the staff who you normally cannot, but who are driven in their hiring by the people you can control, and then, of course, the elected members of the Republican National Committee itself, which ordinarily, while there's usually tremendous overlap among activist Republicans who will be on the committee and supporters of the person who is about to win or has won the nomination for president from that party, there's usually pretty good overlap. But that's not enough for Donald Trump. Let me read you what's going on over at the Daily Beast. Trump's RNC takeover is on the brink of becoming a purge. All right, our reporters who I'm going to have to refresh to make sure I can get the correct names again. Jake LaHutte and Reese Gorman. Whether I'm pronouncing the names correctly, that I can't promise you. But I know how they're spelled. Here's the story. First came the internal grumbling about Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, who he placed there the first time, of course. But anyway, then came McDaniel's decision to step down from her post at the end of February as she lost the support of Donald Trump because she only licked his boots ceaselessly every day for the past 4 years. After that came Trump's move to put forward a slate of loyalists to take over the party's top spots, including an election-denying state party chair, a Trump campaign senior advisor, and the former president's own daughter-in-law. Next would come the purge. Now, let me pause at this stage to say, because I don't know whether they're going to cover it extensively in this article, but I will add to our understanding, our background understanding, this piece from The Hill by Julia Manchester just the other day, the 17th, under the headline, Lara Trump steps into political spotlight with RNC role. She'd already been in the political spotlight before, but this spotlight a little bit brighter than in the past. Lara Trump is in the political spotlight after her father-in-law, Donald Trump, tapped her to be co-chair of the Republican National Committee. She is no stranger to politics, having served as one of the former president's most high-profile surrogates. And we're speaking here of campaign surrogates, I think. Anyway, she was the subject of speculation that she would launch a bid for North Carolina's Senate seat back in 2022. She didn't do it. The move reflects the former president's desire to have loyalists within the party, which, you know, that's a thing, which has raised alarms among Trump's critics. But that's all. Alarms. No actual action. Everybody likes to keep loyalists around. Trump just tends to take it to sort of unprecedented levels, said Doug Heye, is it? Heye, a former spokesperson for the RNC. Before getting involved with her father-in-law's presidential runs, Lara Trump worked as a producer for the television news magazine Inside Edition. She later used her television experience to host and produce the weekly pro-Trump webcast Real News Update during the Trump administration. That's a nepotism job, but okay. In 2020, she was a top advisor to the former president's re-election campaign, also nepotism, and launched the Women for Trump campaign to galvanize female support for the president. She was later named a Fox News contributor in 2021. She's gradually risen within Trump world, and she's someone who the president sees as an effective communicator and an ambassador for him when he cannot be somewhere, said Ford O'Connell, a Republican strategist. She's earned that trust, and that's why you're hearing her name for co-chair. Why not Eric's? He's, I guess, presumably too dumb or lazy or both, or just not trusted by Donald. In addition to publicly backing his daughter as co-chair, daughter-in-law, really, Trump announced he was backing Michael Whatley for RNC chair. The former president praised Whatley, who had been a vocal supporter of Trump's unfounded voting fraud claims, for being, quote, committed to election integrity. Trump also said he asked his senior campaign advisor, Chris LaCivita, to serve as the committee's chief operating officer. The development comes after the New York Times reported that the current chair, Ronna McDaniel, is expected to resign following the South Carolina primary later this month. Trump is widely predicted to win that primary, with polls showing him leading Nikki Haley by more than 30 points. The expected victory will further cement Trump's role as the runaway favorite to secure the nomination going into what is expected to be a contentious general election. McDaniel has been chair of the RNC since 2017, despite Republicans seeing underwhelming performances in the 2018, 2020, and 2022 elections. The Trump team knows this is going to be a close election, and the RNC needs to be up to snuff to meet the moment, especially when it comes to field operations and funding, O'Connell said, when in reality, they know it's going to be a close election, and the RNC traditionally collects a lot of money, and they want to be able to steal that money. While the RNC, led by Whatley and Lara Trump, would signify a full Trump takeover of the party apparatus, some say it's unclear what the pecking order would be. What we don't know is what would the structure of the RNC look like, because it's sort of being defined right now as her and Whatley being co-chairs together, and it's not clear what that means. What is the breakdown of responsibilities and so forth? Hay said, or High, whatever, how you say it, Heye. With McDaniel currently at the helm of the RNC, Drew McKissick, who also serves as chair of South Carolina's Republican Party, serves as co-chair. Typically, there is a chair and below them what's called co-chair, but it's not two co-chairs, this consultant person High said. It's just not clear how that structure is going to develop. Republicans say the unsurprising move is Trump's attempt to streamline the RNC operation with his campaign operation. One of the things that I think frustrates the Trump team, and it's frustrated previous GOP Republican presidential nominees, is how siloed the RNC can be, and how sometimes they may be doing something different from what you want them to do, O'Connell said. When you have a nominee and you're the party out of power, it is hard to streamline the two together and become a lean, mean fighting machine all at once, he continued. Trump has already recognized that from 2016, so now he's going to make sure that it's not a problem when he officially becomes the nominee. The president's daughter-in-law has already telegraphed what her vision for the committee is going to be. The RNC needs to be the leanest, most lethal political fighting machine we've ever seen in American history, Lara Trump said in an interview on Newsmax. That is the goal over the next 9.5 months. If I am elected to this position, wink, if I'm elected to it, I can assure you there will not be any more $70,000 or whatever exorbitant amount of money it was spent on flowers, she continued. Every single penny will go to the number one and only job of the RNC. That is electing Donald J. Trump as president of the United States and saving this country. It'll only be $65,000 worth of flowers for her office, I'm sure. While her comments made headlines, strategists say they are in line with what to expect in a presidential year. That's the job, Hay said. The job of the RNC is to elect the nominee and work with states to do that, and victory funding and so forth. Given that's super detailed there. Working with states and victory funding and so forth. Given her role in launching Women for Trump and being arguably the most prominent female face of the campaign, Lara Trump is largely seen as an asset in appealing to that voting bloc as well. Women voters, particularly suburban women voters, will play a deciding factor in the presidential election, it is said. You need someone who can go in there and be a surrogate, connection point, whatever you want to say, for a group that you need to win over, one Republican strategist said. We are talking about margins. Former President Trump obviously feels comfortable that she did a good job last time and she can do a good job this time. Well, what he actually feels is that she's pretty dependable when it comes to steering money out of their coffers and into his. That seems pretty obvious. Now, I wanted to share with you what the folks at Daily Beast had been reporting about the rest of the RNC. Here, the takeover on the brink of becoming a purge. So as we had read, they reported, of course, that Ronna McDaniel stepped down and that they're included in the upper echelons of the leadership at the RNC that Trump would be installing was Lara Trump. But we needed to hear a little bit more about what she was doing. Next up was this purge idea. And we pick up again with the Daily Beast. I think, it says, quoting Steve Bannon of all people, I think within 30 days, you'll see a purge of staffers from the RNC because it's a hotbed for anti-Trumpism. That's Bannon, Trump's former chief strategist and host of the War Room podcast, telling the Daily Beast, that's the open secret. Skeptical holdouts within the RNC have gotten the message. Their days are numbered. But it's not just RNC staffers who are not safe. It's also the party's 168 committee members and their consultants who have enjoyed friendly business relationships with the party, according to GOP sources familiar with the dynamic who spoke to the Daily Beast. I think there will be a whole new 168. And they've been working around the country to make it a full Trump 168. A source close to the RNC told the Daily Beast, Trump's going to make his own rules here, and he wants his own people in there. That will destroy it. That's pretty good. The new RNC leadership slate, which still needs to win the support of a majority of the 168 members, is about as MAGA as it gets. Right? And I guess that's the sense in which Lara Trump was still saying, well, if I'm elected to the post. I mean, usually you make the recommendation, the party's nominee makes the recommendation, and everybody's on the team, so they say, yeah, sure, we'll vote to elect them. But just to make sure, why don't we replace all 168 members of the committee with people who are committed to voting for whoever I say they should vote for? It's usually the case anyway, but we'd like to make it explicit. Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, is the highest profile addition, tapped to serve as co-chair, chiefly tasked with fundraising. Chris LaCivita, one of the top advisors to the Trump campaign, will serve as de facto chief operating officer, despite the position technically not actually existing within the RNC. But if you appoint the rest of the executives, I guess you can get them to create the position. Trump loyalist Michael Whatley, chairman of the North Carolina state GOP, is in line to directly succeed McDaniel as party chair. One of their main goals in overhauling the RNC, according to a source familiar with the plans, is to rid the apparatus of so-called partycrats, those who've been climbing the ladder in D.C., working for GOP organizations, and replace them with staffers who have more campaign experience. There's no campaign people there in that whole effing building, like none. Is that really true? The Republican familiar with the plans said, the RNC, they used to be known for providing a state-of-the-art campaign training, and inexplicably they ended it years ago and could never explain why. And it's because the last time you Trumpified the place, they got rid of everybody and just put the grifters in. Now they don't have any campaign training, and they'll be replacing the old grifters with new hyper grifters who also will not be able to train anybody for a campaign. Boo-hoo. The party's training program worked well to shape campaign managers, field organizers, and other important roles on campaigns, the Republican said. Under the new regime, the RNC will go back to training its canvassers in-house rather than hiring outside firms to do so. Everyone in the party saw how that went in Iowa, the Republican said, taking a shot at former GOP candidate Ron DeSantis's bold, yet failed, strategy of contracting critical voter contact tasks to outside groups. The new and staunchly MAGA crew will take control of the RNC at a pivotal time for both Trump and the party. Trump is close to locking up his third consecutive presidential nomination and continues to exert dominance over a party he had already completely transformed since his 2016 election victory. At the same time, Trump is about to hit a serious cash crunch stemming from his numerous court battles, and there are questions over whether he'll continue to tap his own political operation and the RNC itself to pay the legal bills. The RNC, which ended 2023 with historically low on funds, can't quite afford that. A Trump official told Axios that no RNC cash would go to Trump's legal defense, but there are possible ways around that. And there's some links to that just in case you wanted to know about it. And it's got an intriguing title to it, too. The truth about Trump's RNC shakeup and why the GOP will, why the GOP will suffer. Roger Sollenberger reporting on that one. Maybe we could take a look at that at some point in the future. On top of everything else, though, one of the chief goals of the new leadership group is to transfer more RNC money to state party organizations, particularly those in the battleground states, according to a Republican source familiar with the plans. In states like Michigan and Arizona, two pivotal battlegrounds, they could desperately use the transfers, with both GOP organizations close to going broke. Why? Because they went full MAGA already. So now they'll be bailed out from their full MAGA takeover boondoggles, either having spent all their money on a fake audit as they did in Arizona, or blowing it all in I don't know what when Christina Caramo took over the state Republican Party in Michigan and then went broke with it. But now they're planning bailouts of those organizations. Whether or not they actually have the money to bail them out, I don't know. Whether or not it's effective to bail them out, I don't know. Despite the enormous challenges, this new triumvirate is inspiring optimism both in Trump world and around the RNC, at least among those who aren't getting purged. Though McDaniel rose to the party's top position as an unflinching Trump loyalist, she fended off challenges to her leadership for much of the past year. In 2023, activist and lawyer Harmeet Dillon ran against her RNC chair, citing a list of grievances, chiefly wasteful spending. Oh well. Although she took heat over the lackluster 2022 midterm results, McDaniel was ultimately undone by mounting clashes with Trump over the party's finances and her refusal to cover his legal bills. In other words, she's being pushed out for her willingness to stand up for the RNC, retaining its money so that it can do its mission, as opposed to emptying its coffers into Trump's pockets. So, get rid of her. The new crew of leadership, of course, will be far less resistant to helping Trump however possible. I think what we've seen between Whatley, Lara, and Chris, I think it's going to be a great team. Another RNC source familiar with the shakeup told the Daily Beast. Bannon, who has often been harshly critical even of the Trumpified GOP establishment, seconded the sentiment, saying he believes Lasivita is a tough political operative and that he understands exactly what needs to be done to clean out the consultants class's rat's nest at the RNC, i.e., take the money that you're giving to them and give it to me instead. While there is widespread agreement on the wisdom of Trump choosing Whatley and Lasivita to helm the RNC, opinions differ when it comes to Lara Trump. Bannon, for one, commended Trump's decision to elevate his daughter-in-law as vice chair, calling it an inspired choice for the base. Within GOP circles, the concerns surrounding Lara Trump center on her being viewed as a nepotism appointment, who doesn't have the experience necessary to do what the co-chair job entails, which is mainly fundraising. One former official on the Trump 2020 campaign expressed that they were happy McDaniel is leaving, but said that to view Lara Trump as the solution is a joke. She's not there to be an asset to the RNC. She's there to be Trump's eyes and ears, this former official said. Another Republican operative relayed a similar sentiment about the presidential daughter-in-law, saying that GOP donors are in full panic mode over the possibility of Lara Trump being RNC co-chair. The RNC needs someone who can rake in the dough for Trump, the operative said. She ain't it. Well, she is. She'll rake whatever dough they rake into Trump's pockets. Whether or not she can increase the amount that people give the RNC, I don't know. But she can certainly increase the amount that the RNC wastes on Trump. Still, some Republicans said Lara Trump has improved upon the initial impression that she made to committee members on the fundraising circuit. One source close to the RNC, who used to think she was a lightweight with little knowledge of the political landscape, conceded in a recent interview that the newly minted GOP power player has made significant strides in her command of the issues and personalities which dominate the donor landscape. That could be true. She's just been there long enough. I actually think she's very competent. I don't know about that. And I think she's smart and would learn quickly, the same as Rona did. And you got rid of her pretty quick, too. Well, actually, it took you quite a while to get rid of her, didn't it? Anyway, in that position, one of her biggest things would be raising money, and she would have Trump's contacts. It bothers me a little bit that it's nepotism, but I guess that's how this world runs. They're just waking up to this. As a member of the Republican National Committee, with Trump's daughter-in-law handling the money, his senior campaign advisor will be overseeing day-to-day operations within the party while still serving on the campaign. That's okay, since she's stealing the money from one to the other. Whether the RNC will be able to revamp its transversed state parties remains to be seen, but the full merging of Trump world and the party apparatus is fast approaching, come what may in the next 8 months. Way too early for us to even be speculating on the amount of money sent to state parties, the Republican familiar with the plan said, but expect to see a lot more activity between the RNC and the state parties, and a lot more synergy, I don't know about that, between the RNC and the Trump campaign. Synergy in the sense of, I want you to take all of this money and put it into my bank account. And to the extent that you say yes, that is synergy. Get it? Okay. So there we are. I was interested in taking a look at this Roger Solenberger piece. Let me see if I can't. You know how it is with the Daily Beast. I may have to pocket it and then take a look at it from there. But let's see. Maybe that's something we can sneak in the last couple minutes here. How old is the piece? Is it current? Let's see. It is dated February 15th, so it's relatively current. Let's say the truth about the Trump's RNC shakeup and why the GOP will suffer. I'd like to know about that. Why don't we take a look? Donald Trump doesn't want his snowballing legal troubles to be just his problem. He's trying to make it an issue for the entire Republican Party, just as he was making it an issue for the entire banking industry earlier in the show. During a monumental election year for the GOP, Trump has effectively taken over the Republican National Committee. We've read about that. A bid to ensure that the national fundraising juggernaut will chiefly serve him and not other Republican efforts. That's interesting all by itself. And of course, I assume that he intends to use that one, not only to enrich himself and impoverish everyone else, but he can occasionally dole out favors in exchange for your pledge of undying loyalty to me for whatever reason, whether I win the election or not, or just need to seize power later on. I will open up some trickle of funding to you and or your state party as you seek re-election. Hopefully, he'll be very fickle about that and will destroy everyone's ability to run an effective race. Fingers crossed. Anyway, his personal pick to chair or co-chair the RNC, his daughter-in-law Lara, teased the new vision on Tuesday during an interview on Newsmax. Every single penny will go to the number one and only job of the RNC, blah, blah, blah. It's electing Donald J. Trump president of the United States. I don't believe that for a minute, but that will be the stated goal. The arrangement would certainly sound good to Trump, who has shown no compunction about taking tens of millions of dollars from his donors and spending it on his personal legal battles. Of course, Trump's team tried to mollify those concerns on Wednesday with a senior Trump campaign official telling Axios that the RNC won't be paying Trump's legal bills. Wink, they will. But that arrangement is far from set in stone, and Trump can still direct any money that he raises with the RNC straight to his legal defense. That's precisely why it's so notable that Trump picked Lara Trump as co-chair. In addition to senior Trump advisor Chris LaCivita, likely becoming the RNC's new chief operating officer, and Trump-friendly Michael Whatley, I've seen it spelled differently before, but Whatley earning the former president's endorsement to lead the RNC, Trump will have more than enough to say to turn on the money spigot and will have more than enough say to turn on the money spigot and can demand large personal cuts from party funds. Certainly, the new additions to the RNC are conspicuous. The previous RNC co-chairs each brought institutional experience to the table. Drew McKissick was a grassroots specialist, and the co-chair before him, Tommy Hicks, had deep ties to deep pockets. But if the RNC is only going to operate with Trump in mind, it'll be a massive blow to down-ballot Republicans and state parties desperate for the cash infusion they usually get in presidential election years. And even if Trump doesn't seize RNC cash for his own purposes, the prospect of him doing so could very well have a chilling effect on donors turning over their cash. So he may bankrupt another couple of state party operations that were thinking they could hold on by the skin of their teeth until the expected influx of cash during a presidential year, which turns out not to show up, either because Trump has stolen it or because people are so worried about Trump stealing it, they never gave it in the first place. Despite Lara's priorities, simply electing Trump isn't the RNC's only job. National parties also serve as the strategic and financial hubs of a campaign support system, providing critical backing to down-ballot candidates and state party committees around the country. A shakeup providing Trump with more opportunities to purloin from the RNC couldn't come at a worse time for these groups. The RNC is coming fresh off a historically poor fundraising year, going through a major leadership overhaul and scrambling to support its flotilla of state parties. Many of those state committees have been further hamstrung by their own legal and financial woes and are dangerously close to the red, all while they gear up for the 2024 elections. And this includes state parties in some of the most contentious battlegrounds in the country. The Arizona GOP had a tumultuous 2023, for instance. Its former party chair, who resigned in January amid bribery accusations, by the way, was forced to beg for RNC support last year after legal bills associated with a botched election audit nearly bankrupted the group. Everyone remembers that, right? The party ended the year with just $310,000 in the bank, accounting for its $55,000 in debt. That's around half of what it had at the same point in the 2020 cycle, when the state party ultimately spent $24.4 million. Arizona Democrats, by contrast, ended 2023 sitting on $725,000. In Michigan, same problem. You know about that. North Carolina Republican Party, where Whatley comes from, has roughly $283,000 available and owes $72K. They kicked off 2020 with $360K in the bank. Its Democratic counterpart boasts nearly $600,000 in the bank. Pennsylvania, they've got just $137,000 in cash on hand at year end after raising about $656,000. Compare that to the top of 2020 when that committee held $370,000 and had just raised $1.5 million. Dems there have nearly $560,000 to play with. It's not all bad news for every GOP state party. Believe it or not, the Florida party had $4.4 million in its account and no debt. So maybe Ron DeSantis is doing something right down here. Anyway, that's the end of the time that we've got to share this story with you. There's more, of course. I'll share a link with it, with you, so you can check in on it on your own. I'll read up on it, so it'll be part of our background thinking going forward. Now, in order to further enhance your background thinking, Justice Putnam takes the mic and takes you on a tour of around the country and around the world.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Right, but as I said, time now to listen to what Justice has for you today, including Trump has missed a major deadline with the Supreme Court. I saw that story yesterday. He'll fill you in on about all of that. Plus, well, let's say the West Virginia House of Delegates passing a bill might be of some interest, allowing the prosecution of librarians. No problems there, right? Stay tuned.